He wanted to go to a funeral with a group of friends in the U.S. Virgin Islands. A U.S. and all you have to do is board an airplane, show your driver's license, and get on the plane. A funeral. He couldn't do that without being stopped, interrogated, put aside, humiliated in front of all of his friends, some of whom are doctors and professionals and just everyone, and everyone in the airport. And the response to that was, well, we're not going to tell you why it's happening, but we will acknowledge that he's on a list. And there's no rhyme or reason. He's a Muslim. And that's how we treat Muslims here. That's the message we're getting. That isn't what they said, but that is the message that they are sending to not only Mr. Mahmoud, but a lot of other people as well. And we know this because the individual who is primarily responsible has done it to others. And I can't get too deeply into those other events, but I can tell you that those other events exist and that it's the same drill. Muslim-sounding last name, carries some kind of hazardous materials permit, permit revoked, no reason given, career ended.
Mr. Katz, let me ask you, do you feel that the case of Mr. Mahmoud is an isolated case, or do you feel like there are many other cases like his in America?
Well, I know that there are many other cases like his in America because Mr. Mahmoud is not the first Muslim that I represented. There are many, many others. I'll give you an example. A year and a half ago, I represented a woman who had been terminated from her employment for the crime of wearing a head covering, which is obviously allowed in this country. There's no prohibition. But she was a very highly ranked person of enormous integrity who had performed well and for many known companies in the U.S. Well, she became the hiring director of a well-known company here in Atlanta. And her new boss came in and said, I don't like your head covering and I don't like your religion. And he walked her out the door and just fired her. We were able to be successful in that case and restore a measure of compensation, but it doesn't restore the dignity that's lost. The humiliation is not restored. That's a permanent thing, and that's why these cases are so important. There's another case that I've recently been consulted about, a Druze, where his son was 18 years old, and in his own front yard, beaten bloody, while the crowd screamed "dirty Arab," "filthy Arab," and other vile statements. And he was a Druze. He wasn't even an Arab. But because his father spoke Arabic, but because he looked, or they associated him as being a Muslim, he was beaten and arrested. And the neighborhood seemed to be...
He was beaten, then he was arrested?
No, he was beaten.
Yeah.
He was not arrested, but then he was threatened with arrest. And will the district attorney do something about that? Will he prosecute it as a hate crime? Or will it just go down as one more misdemeanor, one more small thing? But it's not a small thing, because even in the police report, the policeman put in the report all of the anti-Muslim, all of the anti-Arab statements. Now, I'm not suggesting that every single American is against Muslims or against Islam, but there are many instances like this that are a problem in this country.
But when these type of cases come to you, outside of the legal aspects, what did it say to you about the understanding and the attitude of some Americans towards Islam and Muslims?
I've known for a long time that Americans do not have a good understanding of Muslims. They do not have a good understanding of Islam. My understanding is that there's a very significant bias in this country against Muslims that needs to be remedied through education, through an awareness. I'll give you another example. We were building this office, and the carpenter there, I had to ask him to leave because he was talking to his friend and making a lot of anti-Muslim statements.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that just can't go here. Mm-hmm. But he was building my office, and just in casual conversations, there were swear words and very disgusting racial statements about,
mm-hmm.
about Muslims.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a lot of people in this country who are very open-minded, who are willing to learn,
mm-hmm.
Who are better than that. I like to think that America is better than that.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a problem here. Mm-hmm. It's a problem that has to be redressed through education mm-hmm. and through, frankly, these court cases.
Right.
Because then you put somebody's pocketbook at risk. Mm-hmm. You make this public, and then people get the message mm-hmm. that this is unacceptable.
Right.
And I've represented many Muslims that have experienced the exact same thing, from Pakistan, from Iran, Syria, Palestinians, you name it.
But Mr. Katz, if I
may,
may,
the same way.
If I may ask you, you are Jewish.
Yes.
And you're taking on the case of Muslims and people involved in national security issues. Did it ever come to your mind, or did you ever think that maybe this might harm your practice or maybe harm your standing in the community or anything like that?
No, and I'm not going to worry about it. I mean, that's what's right is right. Mm-hmm. For thousands of years, Muslims and Jews lived together in harmony. Mm-hmm. In Europe, in Christian countries, there are certain occupations that Jews could not fulfill. Mm-hmm. When Jews were in Muslim countries, they could fulfill any occupation. Mm-hmm. My wife is Jewish. She's from Morocco. Mm-hmm. Jews lived in Morocco for thousands of years mm-hmm. in harmony with Muslims. Mm-hmm. So I see my work as enhancing that. Mm-hmm. And if anybody in my community is opposed to that, then I'm very sorry. They should go back and study what Judaism is all about. Mm-hmm. And then they will learn that there's nothing inconsistent at all with representing Muslims. In fact, I think it's my duty. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Far from being an impediment to being Jewish, I think it's my duty as a Jew to help the oppressed. Mm-hmm. And that's one wonderful thing about Islam, is that Islam is about, at its core, is about helping the oppressed. Mm-hmm. It's about doing the right thing. Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mr. Katz, let me come back to the case of Bilal Mahmoud. So what's the procedure now? What have you done so far in this case, and what do you hope to achieve in the cert application which you've submitted to the Supreme Court? And also, how confident do you feel that it will actually be accepted by the Supreme Court?
Well, the first thing we did is we filed a lawsuit against the responsible individual, really against the government, if you will, in the federal court here in Atlanta. That case was dismissed. Mm-hmm. And the reason it was dismissed is that they said, well, you have a procedure that you can go follow. Mm-hmm. But the procedure doesn't give Mr. Mahmoud or any other Muslim or anyone else mm-hmm. any remedy at all. In fact, Mr. Mahmoud went through the procedure, and they wouldn't even tell him why they removed his license. Mm-hmm. He couldn't even get that much from them. Mm-hmm. Couldn't get an explanation at all. It was always, well, this is national security. Mm-hmm. But they said, even though it was racially motivated, even though there is no due process and no procedure, even though they can do what they want without any remedy, that should be sufficient for you, Mr. Mahmoud. Mm-hmm. And that's what the court said. Mm-hmm. And these are the laws that were passed in the wake of some very fearful reaction to this 9/11. Mm-hmm. So we went to the federal appellate court here in Atlanta, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. And we made the case, and we said, this is wrong. There must be a remedy for this wrong. It's racially motivated. It violates his constitution.